Welcome to the Sheth Leadership Academy lecture series, where Professor Jagdish Sheth, author of books such as 7 Bad Habits of Self-Destructive Companies and Chindia Rising, delves into topics related to management and marketing, providing real-world examples in a compelling format. This lecture is on how to manage diverging customer expectations and is part 1 of 3.
It is in many ways contrary to the marketing's fundamental principle that customer is always right. In fact, I will basically give almost an opposite view that customer expectations are often unrealistic. It may be very hard to accommodate them, to meet their expectations, and it creates more problems in the marketplace, both for the marketer as well as for the market, which means try to satisfy an individual customer's unique and almost irrational demands is getting out of hand, especially with the social media amplifying all this, whatever incident that takes place, sensationalizing it, it is becoming an untenable situation. So this lecture is designed primarily to say, how do we manage customer expectations which are diverging? What are the different strategies companies can have? Is exceeding customer expectation or customer is always right the right thing to do? Or is it possible to abandon the customers? Or is it possible even to shape and alter customer expectations? So that's the presentation in a nutshell. So let's talk about the customer expectations and the problems with customer expectations. The first major problem is customers have false expectation of what the product is supposed to do or what the market is supposed to serve them. I have an example where people drive into the drive-in fast food or quick service restaurants thinking it'll be speedier. It's not speedy, it's just convenient. In fact, drive-in would be slower than walk-in, but customers don't understand that because they have their own priors and they come with those expectations, and unless somebody shapes them that those are not the realistic expectations, you have now see the problem between the service provider and the customer. By the way, more and more these issues are arising in the services economy than in the product economy, mainly because in services economies, often it is a one-to-one relationship or one-to-one transaction, and it creates all kinds of issues because customers are so divergent in their views. Sometimes the biggest issue is not just false expectations, but because of those expectations or unrealistic expectations, there's a confrontation and it gets out of hand nowadays. We have seen all the YouTube videos about crazy encounters, especially in the airline industry. On the flight attendants will articulate about how customers come with all kinds of different expectations. They bring the stress into the cabin and you see nothing but road rage, and similarly airline rage. Similarly, hospitality rage, every place rage just dominates. And this is very expensive for the marketer. You try to accommodate up to a point, but beyond that one you simply say enough is enough. Because the frontline employees not only are verbally abused, but nowadays they're physically assaulted. And since customers always have the upper hand, the belief is that you should go along up to a point or you bring in the law enforcement agencies, which itself is an expensive proposition, time consuming, all the investigations, etc., etc. So confrontation encounters with customers is arising because of the diverging customer expectations of what a service provider will do for you. The third one is very important point. There's a lot of hidden cost of doing business. I'll take an analog first and before tell you about the customer service side. I at one time, maybe 5-10 years ago, became very much involved in non-violence from a research viewpoint. In the US, there are at least 1 million annual physical assaults, including the robbery, shootings, etc., that takes place at the place of work. I call it workplace violence. Majority of that happens because of a disgruntled employee, or it happens because there is a strained relationship in the family. And of course, more often than not, you have the hold-ups, especially in a retail environment, retail stores, the convenience stores, the gas stations, as we know. And of course, nowadays you have major malls being attacked by terrorist movements. I estimated the cost not to the victims, not to the local municipality and the police and the fire and the ambulance, but to the marketer alone, and the numbers are staggering. In fact, 5-6 years ago, my research showed that there is a hidden cost to the nation of $200 billion annually in those kinds of physical encounters of marketplace violence, as I called it by and large, or a workplace violence, and that is fascinating. In fact, For a while, it was bigger expense than any war money we ever spent before Afghanistan and to some extent Iraq. As there is a workplace violence that we are researching, there is also a marketplace violence. People are bringing their stress, their rage, their anger, their frustrations into the market economy, into the market transactions. And there is a study done way back in 1985 that showed that 75% of critical incidents in the services industries were directly attributed to customer expectations. Only 25% of the studies had something to do with there was a marketer failure, an operational problem. There may have been, in fact, some sort of a safety, product safety problem, food, health problem, something like that, which was a marketer's fault, but 75% was all created by wrong expectations of customers. And the last part is very key, especially again in the services economy. The frontline retail stores, the frontline grocery stores, or the frontline services such as airlines, hospitality that we talked about, healthcare, the burnout of the frontline employees. And by the way, it goes to education now. Not only just health care, but education. Teachers have burnout now. Professors have burnout, for example. And the burnout of frontline employers, especially in the call centers, very stressful business. 911 calls, very stressful business. Healthcare, very stressful business. And that is where the frontline employees are simply saying, I would rather leave the occupation or retire early than serve the customers, even though they have the passion to serve the customers. These are the issues with customer expectations. There is also a catch-22 of marketing. The more the marketer tries to accommodate, the worse the situation. There is an escalation of expectations. The more you accommodate customer expectations, the greater the rise in expectations. I usually jokingly say that at one time, during the old days of innkeeping, bed and breakfast, you were just glad that you had a clean bed primarily. But today, unless the bed is turned down and there are 2 mints on the pillow, you are unhappy. Today, you have to have a Wi-Fi, a free Wi-Fi, and if it does not work as soon as you walk into the hotel, you are angry. Think about the expectations. We didn't even have the internet at one time, therefore we had no expectations about reaching out the world on a 24/7. Interestingly. So escalation of expectation arises more the marketer tries to accommodate or to serve customer diverging expectations. The other strategy we have been all talking about in marketing is personalized marketing, customer experience, personalized to individual, customer needs, wants, desires. I find that personalized marketing actually is increasing the divergence. In other words, rather than reduce the range of expectations to a manageable level, shaping the customer expectations, the more we personalize, the more the divergence by definition. So those are the problems. The third and a very key problem of catch-22 marketing is that it's very expensive. And you can't raise the prices anymore. You can try to charge individually to each individual customer. You can try to charge, for example, by certain segments and different pricing, by time of the day, by the weekend, dynamic pricing mechanisms. But overall, it is getting very hard, especially in the US economy, after liberalization of trade from the 90s, for example, the formation of WTO. Everybody wants to come in America to serve American consumers, and therefore there is a hyper competition. Best examples I can give you right now is, for example, in the cellular telephone business. All manufacturers would love to sell in the American market. All of the service operators would rather sell and market into American markets. So cellular telephone services are having a huge commoditization. And of course, airlines is even a better example. Today in airlines, this is a major problem. Prices have to be kept low and your costs are going up. But for the recent decline in the oil prices, airlines were never profitable at one time. So hyper competition due to liberalized international trade is making very difficult to raise prices. Now the question is why customer expectations are diverging more and more. What are the causes behind? And in the next chart, I have identified several reasons why this divergence is going to rise and expand or increase over time. The first one is lifestyle diversity. There is no traditional family where husband is the breadwinner, wife is the homemaker, they have 2 kids and a a dog, as you used to joke about. There is no some such family. Actually, it's a minority today. We have actually very large divergence of the modern families. There's an interesting television program in America called Modern Family, where they show you how 4 different families are living different lifestyles. And each lifestyle, if it is different, has different expectations about when to serve, how to serve, what to offer, etc., which is what the marketer's nightmare is all about. There is no defined market out there. Markets are getting fragmented, markets are getting fractured, markets are getting more and more micro, and it's not, you don't know how to sell them. I also coined a phrase many years ago in my demographic work that we are all living like a roommates. It's called a roommate family. Nobody has the time to eat together anymore. Each one comes and goes at their own schedule. Many households nowadays say, this is my food in the refrigerator. This is my space in the refrigerator. So our expectations are no longer homogeneous at the household level, but they're getting actually individualized at the individual level. Each family member has his or her expectations. And now even the pets, the dogs and the cats have their own expectations. Think about the diversity that's arising. Second, we are living longer. And as we live longer, we have 5 different generations, adult generations living together, from the pre-war, which is people who were born before 1914, silent majority, baby boomers who are retiring right now. Think about that one. Generation X, Generation Y, and the millenniums. They are so different in their expectations. There is nothing really in common between great-grandparents living alive, kicking, and the great-grandchildren today. That's creating another divergence. So intergeneration differences in expectations are rising as much as inter-class differences. We thought at one time socioeconomic classes creates differences in customer expectations. Now within a family, you see the rise of differences between generations. Third, increasing ethnic population. In US, obviously, we have become more and more minorities becoming majority. In fact, California, the largest state, is already non-white majority. Texas, which is the second largest state in population, is about to become non-white majority. The third state in population will be Florida, which also will be non-white majority. And the Census Bureau and the demographers are forecasting that by 2030, the whole nation will become non-white majority. And they are not coming from any one specific area. Everybody is coming from all over the world as immigrants to the American economy. They are coming from Caribbean to Eastern European nations to the Asia, for example, to the traditional African Americans, which have been basically born and brought up here, to the Hispanic population. And this increasing ethnic diversity is creating enormous, in fact, expectation rises. So there are cross-cultural expectations rising in the society. Next area is decline of the middle class. Middle class homogenizes expectations. Neighborhoods and the neighbors look about the same. Today, middle class has been steadily declining, I would say at least from the 80s that I know, and Census Bureau now agrees that we really have a permanent decline of the middle class and the rise of 2 extreme classes. The 1% who have everything and the 99% who are basically average or below average. Surprisingly, in a country so affluent, we have the rise of the real poor below the official poverty level and the rise of the very, very wealthy people. So you see the range of income rising so divergent, it's almost mind-boggling. It's not limited to America. European Union is going through a similar divergence as they've integrated the southern European economies with the northern European economies, as they have an immigration coming especially from, let's say, northern Africa, above Sahara, or coming from the Middle East, for example. And there also customer expectations are diverging by more diversity in their ethnic population. The decline of the middle class, growing income inequality, also is having a growing wealth inequality. It's not limited just to income, which is how we calculate, but wealth inequality. Some people have enormous balance sheets and they don't know what to do with their wealth. Others people are actually in debt all the time. And they have therefore divergent ability to pay either their daily grocery needs of food, shelter and clothing, or their mortgages, or their college education, or their automobile financing, for example. They just don't have the borrowing power even. On top of these demographics, spectacular rise of social media simply is amplifying this divergence. Today, Facebook, Twitter, Google, plus YouTube, you watch something and you have different expectations created for you. While the entertainment industry may not agree that they influence the masses, I've always believed that entertainment industry has been very influential in shaping or in creating new ideas, new wants, new desires in a society. Mass media are very powerful, but mass media themselves are so divergent today. Today there is no such thing as 2 or 3 broadcast networks, a public broadcast network, a typical CBS, NBC, ABC, and a Fox network. But today you have this enormous divergent cable channels, and you can't think about the content that is produced over 400-500 different channels. As if that's not enough, now you have on-demand content coming in, and you have the streaming of the internet along with social media. So my view is that I think the divergence is going to amplify and rise and grow exponentially, especially with the rise of the internet and the social media. Today, I can reach the world globally instantly, and the world reaches me globally and instantly. There were news, bad news, good news in many, many years, thousands of years. Wars have been always there, local conflicts have been there, but we never knew about it. Today, I get that message instantly, what is happening in the world, and therefore shapes my expectations about everything. Although my focus here is on consumption of products and services, but those also come through the internet anymore. And as I mentioned, globalizing the world. We have been globalizing the world after the first energy crisis in 74-78. Economies were stagnating, GDP was not growing, and therefore we all decided as policymakers to have trade as a growth engine, abolishing all the trade restrictions, creating the WTO regime, bilateral trade agreements, regional integration. We did everything possible, and today therefore the world is truly globalized. And if you don't believe that, think about the reach today of e-commerce companies like Alibaba from China, who is entering India or in America, or Amazon, which is already in India and in China. So today Amazon can reach a Chinese customer and shape their expectations, and Indian customers shape their expectations, as Alibaba can do, and suggest here are the merchandise you can get that you had never thought you wanted to buy. Last area is equally important to understand from a marketer viewpoint. Not only do we have these divergent expectations, but there is also a rise of what I will call market vigilantes. We had a neighborhood vigilantes because the local enforcement agencies were not able to take care of the neighborhoods. But today, there is a similar belief that governments are unable to intervene. Governments have taken so much hands-off policy about using regulation, primarily because all economies are desperate for growth, and the growth comes only by having less regulation essentially, and regulation that you have it on the books, you don't enforce it as much. Especially after the collapse of 2008 Great Recession, where average person lost all of his wealth in housing market, in stock market, for example. Now there is a whole mistrust of business as an institution. So people are saying that I have to take care of myself, and there are social activists who are saying rather than focus on political issues or ideological issues or race issues, they are now becoming very, very interested and active in consumption issues, which affects the marketer directly. You know, we had that phenomenon at one time with the rise of consumerism and the rise of Ralph Nader. You might remember that as a crusader. Well, there was one individual at that time in the late 60s, late 70s, early 70s, around that time. But today, I can have a vigilante. Anybody can become a vigilante because of the internet, the web-based capability, and I can actually influence the market. I can influence the consumer, increasing the divergence. So what do? What I've done in the next page is to create a chart that shows you that performance by definition, because of the operations, we try to limit the range of what outcomes will be. So in that chart, you will see performance in the center with a white space, very limited range. And if you plot around that performance, which is the reality of what marketer can do, against the distribution of expectations, you see an enormous distribution. I've plotted sort of a normal distribution, Gaussian distribution, but it's possible that the expectations may be skewed one way or the other. So if you take the zone of accommodations next to the reality, those are realistic expectations. I can bend up to a point, be flexible, be agile as they call it and all the stuff, and try to accommodate. I call it the zone of accommodation. But if you go beyond that one, let's say more than one standard deviation, deviation in a typical statistical way of measuring into a second standard deviation, I cannot accommodate. The cost of accommodation or even the feasibility of doing it may not be there, and therefore what I need is a zone of what I call alteration, which means I have to shape customer expectations rather than accommodate their expectations. If the expectations are so extreme, as I call it the zone of abandonment, the last third standard deviation, you basically say, I just don't want to serve these customers. This is almost reverse of the Six Sigma principle. In Six Sigma, the idea is that you have this divergence in quality assurance, defects arise, and you want to make sure that the defects are narrowly removed and everything is in the center. Here it says you cannot probably take care of that and therefore let go of some customers who have expectations that are unrealistic, that are fantasy, that are something that economically you can't serve them, and therefore abandon the customers. So what I would like to do, therefore, in part 2 of this presentation is to talk about the three strategies. One is to accommodate customer expectations, other one is to abandon customer expectations, and a third one is to alter customer expectations.
Thanks for listening to this lecture on how to manage diverging customer expectations, Part 1, with Professor Jagdish Sheth. For more about Professor Sheth and the Sheth Leadership Academy, visit www.shethleadershipacademy.com.